Well, speaking of that last question, so Dr. Drew said I have hypervigilance a million years ago, just because I notice things, and I'm usually agitated by them, like not so much typos, but I do a lot of profiling and I do a lot of noticing. Some of it is visual. I have like very strong peripheral vision. Like I'm looking at you right now, but sometimes Bryan will reach up and rub his eye, and I'll go, "Oh, Bryan has a question." I can see Bryan clearly right now.
I do have a question
while seeing you.
Impressive.
I don't know what it is. It's just how I am. And then so some of it's an actual tactile thing, and then some of it's a mental process. And it's good. It's the reason I've said to people all the time, I drive like an asshole, and I've been in California driving for over 40 years now, and I've never made contact with another car, although I've had passengers hanging on and using a brake that doesn't exist and yelling.
Holding on
or you can see the people you hit
all the time. And I've never hit I've never been hit. That's the whole thing. Like people do a lot of like, I had an accident. Well, what the fuck was I going to do? I was just stopped there, and the guy, and it's like, I see him. I will see that guy. Now, it's not a drunk driver in an intersection barreling down the street, but I can tell when people are around me doing things. And I don't know if that's just something that's genetic or it was created through a bad childhood, or if that even is a thing, hypervigilance.
Yeah. Well, first of all, it is a thing. There are multiple forms of hypervigilance. Some people who have an early trauma of any kind or who lived in a very unpredictable environment. Remember, the brain is a prediction organ. It's an organ for making predictions about what's happening and what's going to happen. Sometimes people who grow up in a pretty uncertain environment, their nervous system is tuned to fine slicing time. It's like they're looking at time and evaluating life on a higher frame rate than people who are kind of relaxed. Have you ever noticed like people are really relaxed, kind of like, oh yeah, and that person, that happened and this happened. Whereas, a more alert person with more natural levels of adrenaline in their system is going to notice more. Early traumas definitely can sensitize you to novel events in the environment, and you're waiting for them. And that anticipation is a forebrain circuit of trying to predict what's happening next. Is very metabolically demanding. Now, there are also forms of hypervigilance that are sensory driven, which it sounds like you have. I'm not aware of any trauma, but that would be like a Drew kind of
general
thing.
Trauma, but nothing specific.
Okay, so that are sensory driven, where it's sort of like people who are very sensitive to sound because they have perfect pitch. So they listen to a song and they go, oh, that note was off. I don't hear that. I don't have perfect pitch. So it sounds to me, based on your description of your visual perception, that you have an exceptional visual system. I'm not an ophthalmologist, but I have a co-appointment in ophthalmology, and I've spent a lot of 25 years studying the human visual system. What I can tell you, it is a rare thing that someone can be in this type of environment where we're looking at each other, where the cone of visual attention is any broader than this. Most of us have a visual aperture that's really tight. It's like having blinders on. Very few people have broad situational awareness. Now, there are communities that do. So I've done some work with members of special operations communities. And, when the screening for high situational awareness is not specifically a visual test, but oftentimes it's about taking people into novel environments and then taking them out and saying, how many people were in that room? Did you see what changed? These kinds of things. Most people are not very good at that. People who do well and eventually do well in special operations and through that screening process, they're not just good at carrying logs and running. They also have very high situational awareness. Now, situational awareness itself comes in different forms, right? If you've ever been out to dinner with your partner or whatever, and I've had this happen before, and then afterwards my girlfriend's like, did you hear when she said that? And I was like, no, I didn't hear anything, right? Well, that's a different kind of situational awareness. My guess is that your peripheral visual acuity is very high, and that probably has a genetic component to it. That's a very
skipped a generation.
That's a very useful skill, actually, and I think it also explains your ability to drive quickly through Los Angeles and other kind of dense environments and not hit anyone or not be hit, because a lot of that is the so-called defensive driving, just getting out of the way when the moron doesn't signal or whatever. So it's a real asset. I would, in your case, unless it's linked to some specific trauma or it's causing you any challenge in getting to sleep at night or something like that, I would say that's a real asset and a fairly rare asset. So I will depart from the psychiatric, psychoanalytic view of it and say this sounds like a sensory-driven hypervigilance, or maybe an increased vigilance. You can all test people's levels of hypervigilance. Go up behind a coworker while they're sitting there on their phone or something and go, hey. Some people will turn around and go, hey. And some people go,
The jump.
No, they jump. That's what we call we call that pre-pulse startle.
Right.
And in mice and in humans, you can evaluate kind of how jumpy. It's basically how high they're idling. And when I say idle, I mean something very specific. It means the amount of adrenaline that's pumping around at baseline. Just like when you turn on the ignition of your car, some people rev high, some people rev low.
So I'm not a jumper. I'm not a startler.
You seem so. I've also been
but I
watching,
notice everything.
and I've been watching you through this episode quite a bit, and you don't blink very often. Now, the common lore, also total garbage, is that lack of blinking is sociopathy.
Yeah.
Completely wrong. Completely false. Absolutely no basis. Sorry, I bet you said it as I was saying it. I also don't blink very much. That's a reflection of high levels of dopamine and adrenaline.
Exactly what a psychopath would say.
Right. Now,
All right, is something going on with the
Oh,
mic
Dawson's
for
coming in.
him?
I'll fix it.
Sorry.
Yeah, you do
go
your
ahead.
thing.
high levels of dopamine and adrenaline. Every time you blink, you reset your perception of time. If you've ever had something really intense happen, mic
Yep,
thing.
Yeah.
Thank you. Sorry, I probably bumped that. If you've ever been wrapped with attention, guess what? You blink far less. You're just really attending quite a lot. The only reason you blink is to reset your perception of time, or if your eyes get dry.
Well, it's interesting you bring this up because I was watching myself on TV last night and I was noticing myself blink a lot in a 5-minute hit. And I was just looking at me going, why am I blinking so much? I'm not a blinker.
I'll tall you why. So I've been counting I've really been doing this. So your blink frequency is less than once every 2 minutes, which is remarkable. And I'm not here to compliment you. That's not why they brought me here. But I'm just saying, this means you have high levels of baseline adrenaline and dopamine. And when we blink more, guess what's happening? We're getting tired. It sounds so obvious, but even people whose eyes are droopy or kind of hooded, they're sleepy. What happens when we get sleepy? Well, our eyes close and our eyes go down. Mm-hmm. And that's actually because of a set of cranial nerves. If any, Drew could name them off. I teach medical students, but they learn, one of the first things they learn in medical school is which cranial nerves control closing of the eyelids and eyes down. And guess what? When we are alert, our eyes are slightly directed up and our eyelids are wide open. And so some people walk around in the world like this because they're doing ice baths and eating properly and not too much and doing all the things right, and they slept well the night before. And other people are doing this, which we all know, the falling asleep.
But I wasn't, it wasn't like Sean Hannity was boring. I was just sitting in this van and I noticed myself blinking more.
Could it be a self-consciousness of the environment, like sitting in a van by yourself and trying to do this artificial?
It's a wildly unnatural environment. You're sitting in a van with an escape of the city behind you.
Oh, you record in the van.
Yeah, and he's throwing questions that you may or may not have prepared for, and there's an ear thing in, and it's very unnatural. So it's not exactly a lab environment, but I did notice myself blinking.
You race cars, right?
Yeah.
When you race cars, we should get a dash cam on you, and I bet you would find that you probably blink, 1/5 the amount of time that you do in this kind of environment.
Oh yeah.
I mean, and then when you get out of an intense race, I don't know much about car racing, but an intense race, I'm guessing that at some point later, not immediately, but at some point later, you feel pretty tired. That was work, right?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. Yeah. I'll tell you. My last professional Trans Am race I did, I'm closing my eyes now so I can concentrate. I got out of the car after, maybe being in the car for like an hour and a half. I drank a Tall Boy IPA, and I literally needed to be driven home. I drank a beer. I can watch football on Sunday with a bunch of dudes and drink 5 beers. Fucking fine after the second game. I drank 2 IPAs and was somebody said you can't. I mean, we're gonna drive back from the track, but we're driving you home. You're having trouble standing up. Yeah. And I realized I've never been hit harder by a beer in my life, and I realized I've purged every ounce of everything I had in my body. When I drank this beer, I was literally going to tip over.
Well, alcohol is, as we know, a slight sedative. Basically, we all have a system in our body called the autonomic nervous system. It's like a seesaw, which alert and calm or really panicked would be one, or asleep, right? And the hinge on that seesaw is tighter or looser for different people. Some people, that hinge is so loose that, for instance, there are examples where people go on their first skydive, and they'll go do the skydive, they'll jump out of the skydive, and then they'll go and sit inside and fall asleep. People who pass out when they see blood, that is not because they're so stressed. That's because this big amplitude in adrenaline, and then the calm sleep circuit kicks on, and they pass out.
Holy
Could
shit.
also be a change in blood pressure,
Wow.
but usually it's the opposite. Some people, like I said, they idle high, some people idle low. And we can all learn, the key thing is that we can all learn to adjust it so that we're more comfortable. The alert and calm is the best state to go through life, unless you want to be asleep. And so the double inhale followed by an exhale is a great way to calm down quickly. If you're having a hard time getting enough energy, I would say morning cold shower or exercise, maybe intermittent fasting, maybe eat a little bit later. And then the one that a lot of people rely on is caffeine, and I drink coffee and tea. But a lot of people who have a crash in the afternoon would do very well to delay their caffeine intake in the morning to 90 to 120 minutes, an hour and a half to 2 hours after waking up. For reasons that we probably don't have time to get into, but you build up this sleepy molecule called adenosine. When you sleep, that gets wiped away. But most people wake up with a little bit of that still floating around. Caffeine prevents that from working. So if you wake up and you drink coffee immediately, as opposed to water or something else or tea immediately, you block the effects of adenosine, but then when that caffeine wears off, that adenosine works even better and you have a crash. So for those of you tired in the afternoon, push your morning coffee out, maybe just nudge it by 15 minutes a day for 4 days and just push out an hour. Then maybe the next week go to hour and a half. People hate it when I say this, but you'll feel so much better. And the taste of that coffee or tea will be incredible because of dopamine.
It's funny. Bill Maher said the same thing in here a week and a half ago. He's like, don't drink that first cup of coffee. It's counterintuitive, but it makes sense. All right, let me hit last spot here. Guy